So-young Kim sat quietly at the end of the long crystal table. Her small hands rested on her datapad while she watched the tall alien beings talk among themselves. The meeting room was huge and filled with creatures she had only seen in pictures before today. The 16-year-old girl looked tiny compared to the massive reptilian aliens that surrounded her. These were the Saurians, an ancient race that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Their scales shimmered green and gold under the bright lights. Their yellow eyes looked down at her with something that felt like amusement. So-young had dreamed of this moment for months. She was the youngest person ever chosen for a diplomatic mission to another world. Her gift for learning languages had impressed everyone back on Earth. She could speak 17 different alien languages and understand their writing systems. But sitting here now, she felt very small and very young. Ambassador Chen sat beside her looking nervous. He was an older man with gray hair who had spent his whole career preparing for meetings like this. Next to him sat Professor Park, her former teacher from Seoul University. Professor Park had taught her everything she knew about alien cultures and languages. At the other end of the table, Commander Veltar raised his massive head. He was the leader of the Saurian delegation. His scales were darker than the others, almost black, and his eyes held the wisdom of many centuries. "Tell me, Ambassador Chen," Commander Veltar said, his voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. "Is this some kind of joke? You bring a child to discuss matters of galactic importance?" So-young felt her cheeks burn red. She had heard this question many times before, but it still hurt. People always focused on her age instead of her abilities. Ambassador Chen straightened in his chair. Dr. Kim may be young, but her knowledge of xenolinguistics is remarkable. She has decoded languages that our best scholars could not understand. "Languages of dead civilizations," interrupted Counselor Vexhan, a female saurian with bright silver scales. Her head crest flared up, showing her displeasure. "Ancient writings have nothing to do with real diplomacy." So-young had been quiet long enough. She knew the Saurians valued directness and strength. Staying silent would only make them think less of humans. "Ancient languages teach us how minds work," she said, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. "How different species think about time, space, and relationships. Understanding the past helps us communicate in the present." The room became very quiet. All the alien eyes turned to look at her. So-young kept her voice steady, even though her heart was beating fast. Commander Veltar's head tilted slightly. This was a sign of interest in Saurian body language. "Explain further, young human." So-young stood up, knowing that sitting while speaking would show weakness to the Saurians. "Your own ancient texts mention the Great Silence that happened 300 years ago. Mining operations in the Kepler system suddenly stopped. 17 outposts lost contact in a single day. Your people never found out why." Counselor Vexhan's scales darkened. "That information is classified. How does a human child know about internal Saurian records?" "Because I read them," So-young replied simply. "Your archaeological reports from the Andorian ruins reference the incident. When I compared those reports with shipping records from that time period, a pattern became clear. Something intelligent in the Kepler system did not want to be disturbed." The silence in the room grew deeper. So-young could hear the soft humming of the air recycling systems. Professor Park was looking at her with pride, but also worry. She was taking a big risk by challenging the aliens so directly. Elder Mordak spoke from the back of the Saurian group. He was the oldest among them, his scales pale with age. "Even if what you say is true, what makes you think your young species could succeed where ours has failed?" So-young took a deep breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. "Because we think differently. Your civilization values tradition and established order. When you encounter something unknown, you try to understand it using methods that have worked before. Humans adapt quickly. We learn new ways of approaching problems." "Adapt," repeated Elder Mordak, his ancient voice crackling. "Child, do you know what guards the most sacred places on our homeworld? What has protected our greatest treasures for 5,000 years?" So-young felt excitement building in her chest. She had studied Saurian mythology extensively. "The great dragons, the ancient beings that chose your people as guardians of this region of space." The old Saurian's eyes widened with surprise. Very few humans knew about the dragons. Most Earth governments treated them as legends rather than real creatures. "Indeed," Elder Mordak said slowly, "and in 5,000 years no outsider has ever been able to communicate with them. They speak in ways that go beyond simple words. Their communication requires deep understanding of consciousness itself. Commander Veltar leaned forward, and So Young sensed that something important was about to happen. The mood in the room had shifted from mockery to something more serious. "Here is our challenge, young human," the commander said. "If your species truly adapts as well as you claim, prove it. Learn to speak with the dragons. Gain their approval for your presence in our space." Ambassador Chen looked alarmed. "And if we cannot? Then humanity remains limited to your local star systems," Commander Veltar replied without hesitation. Forever. So Young felt the weight of those words. This was no longer just about mining rights or trade agreements. The aliens were offering humanity a test that would determine their entire future in space. Success would mean joining the galactic community. Failure would mean isolation among the stars. What exactly would this test involve? Professor Park asked carefully. Elder Mordek's voice became reverent. The dragons exist partially outside normal space and time. They communicate through quantum fields and energy patterns that most minds cannot perceive. Many of our own people spend lifetimes in meditation hoping for even a moment of contact. But if someone could make contact, So Young said, thinking quickly, what then? Then that species would prove they possess the wisdom and capability needed for true galactic citizenship. Commander Veltar answered, The dragons are the ultimate judges of worthiness. So Young looked around the room at all the alien faces watching her. Some showed skepticism, others curiosity, but she could see that they were all taking this seriously now. This was not a dismissal or a cruel joke. It was a real opportunity. When would this test take place? She asked. Immediately, the commander replied. Our ship will take you to our homeworld. You will have one chance to prove your species' worth. The meeting ended with formal agreements and preparations for travel. As the aliens filed out of the room, So Young remained standing at the crystal table, her mind racing with possibilities. Professor Park approached her with concern written on his face. So Young, do you understand what you have agreed to? These dragons are not just legends. They are ancient beings with power beyond our understanding. I know, she replied quietly, but this is why I learned languages in the first place. Communication is the bridge between all conscious minds. If the dragons are truly intelligent, then there must be a way to reach them. Ambassador Chen joined them, looking worried. The entire future of human space exploration now rests on your shoulders. Are you certain you can do this? So Young thought about all the hours she had spent studying alien languages and cultures. She remembered the excitement she felt each time she decoded a new writing system or understood a foreign concept. The dragons would be the ultimate challenge, but also the ultimate opportunity. I don't know if I can do it, she said honestly, but I know I have to try. This is bigger than just me now. This is about proving that humanity deserves a place among the stars. As they prepared to leave for the Saurian homeworld, So Young felt the magnitude of what lay ahead. She was about to attempt something that no outsider had ever accomplished in 5,000 years of recorded history. But for the first time since entering the meeting room, she was not thinking about her age or her limitations. She was thinking about possibilities. The journey to the Saurian homeworld took 3 days aboard their massive starship. So Young spent most of that time in the ship's library, studying everything she could find about dragon mythology and ancient Saurian culture. The library was unlike anything on Earth, with floating holographic displays that responded to her thoughts. Kesara, a young Saurian diplomat, had been assigned as their guide. She was different from the older aliens who had mocked So Young during the meeting. Her scales were bright copper-colored, and her eyes held curiosity instead of dismissal. Tell me about the first time your people made contact with the dragons, So Young asked as they sat together in the observation deck. Kesara looked out at the stars streaming past the ship. It happened 5,000 years ago, when my ancestors were still a warlike species. We had just discovered space travel and were conquering other worlds. The dragons appeared to our greatest warriors in dreams. Dreams? Yes. They spoke to our minds directly, showing us visions of what we could become if we chose wisdom over conquest. It took generations for us to understand their messages fully. So Young made notes on her datapad. What did these visions show? Peace among the stars, cooperation between different species. The dragons taught us that true strength comes from helping others grow, not from dominating them. Kesara paused, but they have never spoken to any species other than ours. Professor Park joined them, carrying several thick books he had borrowed from the library. I have been reading their historical records, he said. The dragons seemed to appear during critical moments in Saurian development, always guiding them toward better choices. Like teachers, So Young said thoughtfully. Exactly. But teachers who exist on a level we can barely imagine. Professor Park sat down beside them. According to these texts, the dragons can perceive time differently than we do. Past, present, and future are all visible to them at once. Kesara nodded. This is why many of our people spend decades in meditation before attempting contact. The dragon's consciousness is so vast that unprepared minds cannot handle the experience. So Young felt a chill of fear, but also excitement. What happens to people who try to contact them without proper preparation? Nothing harmful, Kesara assured her. The dragons simply ignore them. Complete indifference. Many scholars say this is worse than anger, because it means you are not even worth their attention. As they traveled deeper into Saurian space, So Young learned more about the dragons' role in galactic politics. They were not just spiritual guides for the Saurians. They were respected throughout the galaxy as beings of immense wisdom and power. Their approval carried weight with dozens of different species. If the dragons accept humanity, Kesara explained, it will open doors that would otherwise remain closed for centuries. Other civilizations will see you as worthy partners instead of primitive newcomers. And if they reject us, then humanity will be seen as another failed species. Many races have attempted this test over the millennia. None have succeeded. The ship dropped out of hyperspace near a beautiful blue and green planet. Drakmor Prime hung in space like a jewel, its surface covered with crystal formations that caught and reflected starlight. Even from orbit, So Young could see the massive structures that dotted the continents, the crystal networks where Professor Park breathed. I have read about them, but seeing them is something else entirely. They amplify and focus consciousness, Kesara explained. The dragons helped our ancestors build them as a way to enhance communication across our world. The landing was smooth, touching down on a platform that seemed to grow from the planet's surface itself. As So Young stepped off the ship, she immediately felt something different about this world. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, and she had the strange sensation of being watched by something vast and ancient. The landscape around the spaceport was breathtaking. Crystal spires rose from the ground like frozen lightning, each one pulsing with soft light. Plants and trees grew in perfect harmony with the crystal formations, creating gardens of impossible beauty. The sacred valley is several hours away by transport, Kesara told them, but tradition requires that visitors make the final approach on foot. They traveled across the planet's surface in a vehicle that moved silently above the ground. So Young watched the scenery change as they journeyed toward the mountains. The crystal formations became larger and more complex, creating patterns that seemed almost like writing. Are those symbols? She asked, pointing to a particularly intricate formation. In a way, Kesara replied, the crystals respond to thought and emotion. Over time, they have recorded the mental patterns of everyone who has passed near them. So they are like books? More like memories made solid. The dragons taught our ancestors how to read them, but the skill is rare even among our people. As they approached the mountains, Professor Park noticed something strange. The electromagnetic readings here are off the scale, he said, checking his instruments. Something is generating massive energy fields. The dragons, Kesara said simply. They exist partially in our dimension and partially in others. Their presence affects the basic forces of physics. They stopped at a small shelter at the base of the mountains. From here, they would have to walk the final distance to the sacred valley. Kesara provided them with special equipment designed to protect human physiology from the intense energy fields they would encounter. Remember, she said as they prepared for the hike, the dragons will sense your presence long before you see them. They will know your intentions, your fears, your hopes. It is impossible to hide anything from them. The path up the mountain was unlike anything So Young had ever experienced. The rocks beneath their feet seemed to pulse with life, and the air shimmered with colors that had no names. Strange sounds echoed from the peaks above like music played on instruments made of starlight. My people believe the dragons are testing us even now, Kesara said as they climbed. Every step we take, every thought we think, they are observing and judging. So Young felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders, not just for herself but for all of humanity. If she failed here, her entire species would be condemned to isolation among the stars. As they crested a ridge, the sacred valley spread out below them. It was a perfect circle, perhaps 2 kilometers across, with a lake of mirror-still water at its center. But what took So Young's breath away were the massive forms resting around the valley's edges. The dragons were nothing like the creatures from human stories. They were beings of pure light and energy, their bodies seeming to shift between solid matter and flowing radiance with each breath. Some were enormous, the size of buildings, while others were smaller but no less magnificent. "They are so beautiful," So Young whispered. "And so ancient," Professor Park added. "I can feel their age from here. These beings have existed since before human civilization began." All of the dragons appeared to be sleeping or meditating, their forms perfectly still. But as the human party descended into the valley, So Young noticed something. The patterns of light that played across the dragons' bodies were not random. There was a rhythm to them, a mathematical precision that reminded her of the quantum equations she had studied. "Kesara," she said quietly, "do your people have instruments that can detect electromagnetic frequencies?" The Saurian looked confused. "Why would you need such devices? The dragons speak to the soul, not to machines." "Maybe," So Young said, pulling out her own scanner. "But maybe they speak to both." She activated the device and gasped. The display lit up with activity like nothing she had ever seen. The dragons were not sleeping at all. They were constantly generating complex patterns of electromagnetic energy, weaving frequencies together in an intricate dance of information. "Professor Park," she called excitedly, "I need you to see this." As her mentor joined her, So Young began to understand the true nature of the challenge before them. The Saurians had been approaching dragon communication from a spiritual perspective, trying to achieve mystical connection with divine beings. But what if the dragons were not mystical at all? What if they were simply using a form of communication so advanced that it appeared magical to less developed minds? "They are speaking in mathematics," she said in wonder. "In the language of physics itself." Looking up at the nearest dragon, a magnificent being whose form seemed constructed from living starlight, So Young felt a thrill of recognition. For the first time since accepting this challenge, she believed she might actually have a chance of success. The dragons were not speaking in poetry or philosophy. They were speaking in the universal language of science, using electromagnetic fields and quantum mechanics to communicate concepts too complex for simple words. And So Young Kim, who had spent her entire life learning how different minds express themselves, was beginning to understand how to speak that language back to them. So Young spent the next 3 days in a small shelter at the edge of the sacred valley. While Kesara expected her to meditate and prepare spiritually, So Young instead worked frantically with her scientific equipment. She had turned the simple shelter into a makeshift laboratory, with cables and devices covering every surface. "I still do not understand what you are trying to accomplish," Kesara said, watching So Young adjust another scanner. "The dragons do not speak to machines." "But they do speak to energy," So Young replied, not looking up from her work. "And energy can be measured, analyzed, and understood." Professor Park sat nearby, studying the data they had collected over the past few days. The electromagnetic patterns from the dragons were incredibly complex, far beyond anything human science had encountered before. But buried in all that complexity, So Young was finding structure. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a section of the display. "Every dragon has their own unique frequency signature, like a fingerprint. But underneath all the individual differences, there is a base pattern that they all share." "A common language," Professor Park said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Exactly. If I can figure out how to generate that base frequency, I might be able to establish basic communication." Kesara moved closer to examine the strange human devices. "In all the centuries my people have tried to contact the dragons, no one ever thought to use technology like this." "Because you were thinking of them as gods," So Young said gently. "But what if they are just very advanced scientists? What if their spiritual wisdom comes from understanding the universe at a level we have never imagined?" The work was incredibly difficult. The dragons operated on energy levels that would require enormous amounts of power to reproduce. Their frequency patterns were so complex that even the most advanced computers could barely track them. But So Young had noticed something important about the crystal formations throughout the valley. "The crystals are not just decorations," she told Professor Park. "They are amplifiers, natural devices that boost and focus electromagnetic signals." "You think the dragons built them?" I think the dragons helped the Saurians build them thousands of years ago. Look at how precisely they are positioned. Each crystal is placed to create the perfect resonance chamber for dragon frequencies. If So Young was right, then the entire valley was a massive communication system. The dragons did not need to generate enormous amounts of power themselves. They could use the crystal network to amplify their signals and broadcast them across vast distances. I need to find a way to connect my equipment to the crystals, she said. Kesara looked worried. The crystals are sacred. My people have never permitted outsiders to touch them, much less connect alien technology to them. Then I need to ask permission, So Young said simply. That evening, as the twin suns of Drakmor Prime set behind the mountains, So Young approached the nearest crystal formation. It rose from the valley floor like a frozen waterfall, its surface reflecting the fading light in patterns that seemed almost alive. She placed her hand gently on the crystal surface and was amazed by what she felt. The crystal was warm, and she could feel energy flowing through it like blood through veins. More than that, she could sense something vast and ancient watching her through the crystal network. I know you can sense me, she said quietly. I am not trying to harm or steal anything. I just want to understand. I want to learn how to speak with you properly. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the crystal beneath her hand began to glow brighter. Other crystals throughout the valley responded, creating a wave of light that rippled outward from where she stood. Professor Park and Kesara watched in amazement as the entire crystal network came alive. Colors flowed through the formations like liquid music, and the air itself began to hum with harmonic frequencies. Then, slowly, one of the dragons raised its magnificent head. It was the first time in recorded history that a dragon had acknowledged the presence of an outsider. The being looked directly at So Young with eyes that seemed to contain the light of stars. For a long moment they regarded each other across the valley. Then the dragon lowered its head again, but the crystal network remained active. So Young understood that she had been given permission to proceed. Working through the night, she carefully connected her equipment to the crystal formation. The process was delicate and required her to modify her devices in ways that pushed human technology to its limits. But slowly, she began to establish a stable interface between her scanners and the ancient network. The moment the connection was complete, the entire valley erupted with light. Every dragon in sight raised their heads simultaneously, and So Young felt a presence touch the edge of her consciousness. It was like standing at the shore of an ocean and feeling the first wave wash over her feet. They know we are here, she whispered to Professor Park. They are aware of everything we are doing. The sensation was overwhelming. Through the crystal network, So Young could feel the vast intelligence of the dragons examining her equipment, her intentions, even her thoughts. But the examination was gentle, like being studied by a curious but benevolent scientist. Then something extraordinary happened. The dragons began to modify their own signals, adjusting their frequencies to match the capabilities of So Young's equipment. They were actively trying to help her understand them. Look at the display, Professor Park said in amazement. They are simplifying their communication patterns, making them easier for us to decode. They want to talk to us, So Young realized. They have been waiting for someone who could build a bridge between their world and ours. Over the following hours, basic communication began to emerge. The dragons started with simple mathematical concepts, sending prime numbers and geometric patterns through the crystal network. So Young responded with similar signals, proving that she understood the basic structure of their language. Gradually, the communication became more complex. The dragons began sending images, concepts translated into electromagnetic patterns that So Young's equipment could decode and display. She saw visions of the galaxy from their perspective, vast networks of consciousness connected across impossible distances. They are showing us how they see the universe, she told Kesara, not as empty space with scattered worlds, but as a living web of intelligent life. The images showed other civilizations, species So Young had never heard of, all connected through quantum communication networks that allowed instant contact across the galaxy. But many nodes in the network were dark, civilizations that had lost the ability to participate in the galactic conversation. Some species never learned to communicate on this level, Kesara said, studying the display. They remain isolated, cut off from the greater community. But others do learn, So Young said, pointing to the bright nodes scattered throughout the galaxy. They become part of something larger than themselves. The dragons were showing her humanity's choice. They could remain isolated on their single world, or they could learn to join the galactic community. But joining required more than just technological capability. It required wisdom, maturity, and the willingness to think beyond narrow self-interest. As dawn broke over the sacred valley, So Young realized that the real test was just beginning. She had proven that humans could learn to communicate with the dragons, but communication was only the first step. Now she had to prove that humanity was worthy of the trust and responsibility that came with galactic citizenship. The dragons had been waiting for a species that could serve as a bridge between the ancient wisdom of beings like themselves and the young energy of newly spacefaring civilizations. They needed partners who could help guide other species through the difficult transition from planetary to galactic consciousness, looking up at the magnificent beings who had graciously allowed her into their world. So Young understood that she was no longer just representing humanity in a simple diplomatic test. She was auditioning for a role that would determine the future of intelligent life throughout the galaxy. The dragons had chosen to trust her with their greatest secret. Now she had to prove that trust was well placed. The real conversation began on the fourth day. So Young had learned to interpret the basic patterns of dragon communication, but now one of the ancient beings was attempting direct contact with her mind. She felt the presence approaching like a gentle tide of starlight washing over her consciousness. The dragon's thoughts were vast and ancient, filled with memories that stretched back millions of years. At first, the contact was overwhelming. So Young felt like a small boat being lifted by an ocean of wisdom and experience. But gradually, the dragon adjusted its mental presence, making itself smaller and more comprehensible to her human mind. "Welcome, young seeker," the voice said inside her thoughts. It sounded like distant music mixed with the whisper of solar winds. "You have achieved something remarkable. You have learned to speak the deep language." So Young tried to respond through the crystal network, but found that thoughts worked better than technology for this level of communication. "I can hear you," she managed to think back. "And we can hear you," the dragon replied. "We have been watching your species with great interest. You are young and chaotic, but you possess something we have not seen in many ages." "What is that?" "Curiosity without conquest. You seek to learn, not to dominate, but to understand. This is very rare among the young races." Through the mental link, So Young began to see images from the dragon's memory. She witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations across the galaxy. Some achieved great technological power but used it to destroy themselves or others. Some developed wisdom but lacked the drive to explore and grow. Very few managed to balance both knowledge and wisdom. "Your species stands at a crossroads," the dragon continued. "You can choose to join the galactic community and learn from those who came before you. Or you can remain isolated until you develop greater maturity. The choice must be yours." "What would joining the community require?" So Young asked. The dragon's response came as a flood of images and concepts. She saw networks of civilizations sharing knowledge across the galaxy, working together to solve problems that no single species could handle alone. She witnessed the careful guidance of younger races, helping them avoid the mistakes that had destroyed so many others. But she also saw the responsibilities that came with membership. Advanced species were expected to protect and guide newer ones. They had to put the good of the galactic community above their own immediate interests. And they had to face threats that most young civilizations could not even imagine. "There are dangers in the deep spaces between galaxies," the dragon explained. "Entities that feed on organized consciousness and seek to unmake all that we have built. United, the civilizations of this galaxy have always been able to drive them back. Alone, individual species fall quickly to such forces." So Young shuddered at the images of these cosmic predators. They were beings of pure entropy, existing only to destroy order and consciousness wherever they found it. The thought of Earth facing such creatures without help was terrifying. "But we are not ready," she said. "Humanity still fights wars among ourselves. We have barely learned to work together on our own world." "Readiness is not about perfection," the dragon replied gently. "It is about the willingness to grow and learn. Your species shows promise, but promise alone is not enough for membership in the galactic community." "Then what do we need to prove?" The dragon's mental presence grew more serious. "You must demonstrate that you can solve problems that affect others, not just yourselves. That you can think beyond immediate gain to consider long-term consequences, and that you can be trusted with knowledge that could be dangerous in the wrong hands." So Young felt the weight of those words. The dragon was not just testing her ability to communicate, it was testing humanity's character, their fundamental worthiness to join something much larger than themselves. There is a situation that requires immediate attention, the dragon continued. In the Kepler system where your people seek mining rights, there is an anomaly, something that has disrupted our communications for 3 centuries and prevented access to valuable resources. Images flooded So Young's mind showing the Kepler system. She saw mining operations that had suddenly gone silent, ships that had lost contact with their home bases, and strange energy readings that defied all known science. Previous investigation teams have been forced to withdraw, the dragon explained.
Whatever intelligence exists in that system does not respond to our usual methods of contact.
We need fresh perspectives, new ways of thinking about the problem. You want us to solve something that your civilization could not figure out in 300 years? We want you to try. Success would prove that humanity can contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. Failure would simply mean you need more time to develop. So Young realized that this was the real test, not just communication with the dragons, but demonstrating that humans could be valuable partners in solving galactic problems. The challenge was enormous, but so was the opportunity. We would not send you alone, the dragon added. Young Kesara has requested permission to accompany your mission as an observer and guide, and we will provide access to our archives, carefully selected information that should help guide your investigation. What makes you think we can succeed where others have failed? Because you approach problems differently than most species. Where others see established patterns and traditional solutions, you see new possibilities. This flexibility could be exactly what the situation requires. The mental conversation continued for several more hours. The dragon shared more details about the galactic community, the responsibilities of membership, and the specific challenges facing the Kepler investigation. So Young learned about quantum communication networks that connected civilizations across impossible distances, about ancient threats that still lurked in the dark spaces between stars, and about the delicate balance required to maintain peace among dozens of different species. When the contact finally ended, So Young found herself sitting by the crystal formation with tears streaming down her face. The experience had been overwhelming but also incredibly inspiring. She had touched the mind of a being that had witnessed the birth and death of entire civilizations, and somehow found herself worthy of its trust. Professor Park and Kesara approached carefully, seeing the emotion on her face. What did they tell you? Professor Park asked gently. So Young looked up at them, then at the magnificent dragons resting peacefully around the valley. They offered us the galaxy, she said quietly, but we have to earn it first. She explained the challenge that lay ahead, the mission to investigate the Kepler anomaly and prove humanity's worth to the galactic community. The task seemed impossible, but So Young remembered something the dragon had told her. Wisdom is not the absence of mistakes, but the willingness to learn from them. Your species will face many challenges, but you will not face them alone. As they prepared to leave the sacred valley, So Young felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a young linguist who had learned to talk to dragons. She was humanity's representative in a test that would determine their species' future among the stars. The dragons had given them a chance to prove themselves worthy of galactic citizenship. Now it was up to her team to show that human creativity and determination could solve problems that had baffled the galaxy's greatest minds for centuries. Looking back at the valley one last time, So Young made a silent promise to the ancient beings who had trusted her. She would not let humanity waste this incredible opportunity. Whatever waited for them in the Kepler system, they would face it with courage, wisdom, and the hope of earning their place among the stars. The journey to the Kepler system took 7 days aboard the most advanced human starship ever built. The explorer's dream had been specially equipped with experimental shielding and sensor systems for this crucial mission. So Young spent most of the journey studying the Dragon archives that had been provided to her team. The information was unlike anything in human databases. Instead of simple text or images, the Dragon archives contained complete sensory experiences. When So Young accessed a file about stellar engineering, she could actually feel what it was like to manipulate the energy flows of a star. When she studied quantum physics, the equations became living things she could touch and understand. "This is incredible," Dr. Minho said, the mission's lead physicist. These archives contain scientific knowledge that our species will not discover for centuries. But they are being very careful about what they show us, Professor Park observed. Nothing that could be used as a weapon, nothing that might be dangerous in the wrong hands. Kessara watched the humans work with fascination. She had never seen a species approach learning with such intensity and focus. My people required generations to understand even basic concepts from the Dragon archives, she said. Yet you seem to grasp complex ideas within days. Because we are used to adapting quickly, So Young replied without looking up from her studies. Human civilization changes fast. We have to learn new things constantly just to keep up with ourselves. As they traveled deeper into space, the sensor readings became increasingly strange. The normal background radiation of space was being disrupted by something massive in the Kepler system. Energy patterns twisted and flowed in ways that violated basic physics. It is like someone is conducting an orchestra using the forces of nature as instruments, said Dr. Yu Jin, the mission's xenobiologist. So Young looked up from the archives with sudden interest. What did you just say? I said it looks like someone is conducting music with natural forces. Music. So Young felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. What if that is exactly what we are seeing? She pulled up the sensor data and began analyzing it with fresh eyes. The energy disruptions were not random. They followed patterns, rhythms, mathematical relationships that reminded her of musical composition. Look at these frequency harmonics, she said excitedly. They are not chaotic. They are organized, structured, intentional. Professor Park joined her at the display. You think someone is creating art on a stellar scale? It would explain why investigation teams have been forced to withdraw, So Young said. If this is someone's artistic project, they might see visitors as intrusions or threats to their work. Kessara was skeptical. Art that spans an entire star system? That would require technology beyond anything the galactic community has achieved. Unless it was created by a species that transcended physical limitations long ago, So Young replied. The Dragon archives mention civilizations that evolved beyond matter and energy. What if one of them decided to create the ultimate masterpiece? As they dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, the theory gained support. The entire region of space was resonating like a massive musical instrument. Stellar winds carried harmonized frequencies across billions of kilometers. Planet orbits had been subtly adjusted to create gravitational rhythms. Even the star itself pulsed with carefully modulated energy. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced, Dr. Yu Jin whispered as she studied the readings. But the beauty came with dangers. Their ship's systems began malfunctioning as they entered the outer edge of the disruption field. Navigation became unreliable, communication systems failed, and the crew started experiencing vivid dreams and enhanced emotional responses. We are being scanned, So Young realized as strange sensations flowed through her mind. Something is studying our thoughts and reactions. The dreams that came were unlike anything she had experienced before. She found herself flying through gas-giant atmospheres, swimming in oceans of liquid methane, dancing between the coronas of binary stars. But these were not her memories. They belonged to something else, something vast and ancient that experienced reality in ways she could barely comprehend. We are receiving some kind of cultural download, she reported to the senior staff. Whatever intelligence created this symphony is trying to share its experiences with us. Dr. Minho was concerned about the neural effects. Our brain scans show significant changes in activity patterns. We might be experiencing involuntary mental modification. But Kessara had a different perspective. Among my people, shared dreaming is considered a form of deep communication. Perhaps this intelligence is trying to establish understanding with us. As they moved deeper into the system, the source of the phenomena became clear. The fourth planet had been completely transformed into something beyond description. Crystalline structures stretched from the surface into orbit, creating a network of impossible complexity and beauty. The entire planet pulsed with light patterns that matched the stellar symphony surrounding them. It is not a planet anymore, Dr. Yu Jin breathed. It has been converted into a single massive organism or machine. The structures were clearly artificial, but they seemed to grow and change like living things. Energy flowed between them in patterns that reminded So Young of neural networks or circulatory systems, and all of it was synchronized to create the vast musical composition that filled the star system. We are looking at the greatest work of art ever created, So Young said in wonder. Someone has turned an entire solar system into their canvas. As they approached the transformed planet, their instruments detected something even more amazing. The symphony was not just beautiful noise. It contained information, complex data patterns embedded in the harmonic frequencies. The artist was not just creating music. They were broadcasting a message across interstellar space. What are they trying to say? Professor Park asked. So Young studied the data streams flowing across their displays. The mathematics were incredibly complex, but patterns were emerging. The message seemed to be about creation itself, about the joy of making something beautiful that had never existed before. I think they are trying to share the experience of creation, she said slowly. They want others to understand what it feels like to build something magnificent. But there was sadness in the message too. Loneliness. The artist had been working alone for centuries, creating this masterpiece with no one to appreciate it, no one who could understand the vision and skill required to engineer beauty on such a massive scale. They have been waiting for an audience, So Young realized, someone capable of appreciating what they have accomplished. The revelation changed everything. This was not a hostile intelligence defending territory. This was an artist who had been isolated for centuries, desperate for someone who could understand their work. The communication disruptions were not intentional interference. They were simply side effects of a creative process that operated on scales no younger civilization had imagined. We need to let them know we can see their art, So Young said. We need to show them that we appreciate what they have created. But communicating with a being capable of stellar engineering would require approaches far beyond anything in human experience. So Young looked at the transformed planet ahead of them and realized that everything she had learned about language and communication was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. The artist was waiting. After centuries of solitude, they finally had visitors who might be capable of understanding their greatest creation. Now So Young had to find a way to bridge the gap between human consciousness and a mind that thought in terms of star systems and geological time. First contact with the Kepler artist came through dreams, just as it had with the dragons. So Young found herself standing in a space that seemed to exist between dimensions, surrounded by geometric patterns that sang with mathematical beauty. Before her stood a figure made of crystallized light, humanoid in basic shape but clearly unbound by physical limitations. "Welcome," the figure said, its voice resonating through frequencies So Young could feel rather than hear. "I have been hoping someone would finally understand." "Understand what?" So Young asked, amazed at how natural dream communication felt after her experience with the dragons. "The symphony, the great work. I have been composing it for 3 of your centuries, but until now, no one has possessed the ability to perceive it properly." Around them, the space filled with visual representations of the stellar harmonies that filled the Kepler system. So Young saw how star energy was channeled through crystal networks, modulated into patterns of incredible complexity, then broadcast across space as pure artistic expression. "You are an artist," So Young said, understanding flooding through her. "I am what remains of the Luminari civilization. My people transcended physical existence long ago, but I chose to remain behind to complete this composition. It is my masterpiece." The entity showed her more of the great work. Planetary orbits had been carefully adjusted to create gravitational rhythms. Solar winds were modulated to carry harmonics across interstellar distances. The very fabric of spacetime in the region had been tuned like the strings of a cosmic instrument. But the side effects were unintended, the Luminari admitted. "I did not realize that my modifications would disrupt the communication systems of younger species. When your mining operations began, I tried to warn them away, but my messages were misunderstood." So Young thought of the reports of equipment failures and system disruptions. "You were trying to communicate, but our technology could not handle the complexity of your signals." "Exactly. So I withdrew my awareness and continued working, hoping that eventually a species would develop enough sophistication to appreciate my art." The dragons knew, So Young realized. That is why they sent us here. They understood what you were trying to do. The ancient ones have been my only audience for centuries. They appreciate the work, but their perspective is limited by their great age. They encouraged me to continue, but I yearned for fresh minds, new ways of experiencing what I had created. The entity's form shifted, becoming more complex as its excitement grew. Your species thinks in ways mine never did. The neural patterns I observe suggest you will experience my symphony differently than any consciousness that has encountered it before. But the mining operations, the resources we need, a small matter. I can easily modify my composition to create safe passages for your activities. The real question is whether your people would be interested in a larger collaboration. So Young felt her heart racing. What kind of collaboration? I am old even by the standards of transcended beings. Soon I will join my people in whatever realm they have found beyond physical existence. But before I go, I would like to teach others the techniques I have developed. The implications were staggering. The Luminary was offering to teach humanity stellar engineering, how to create art using the fundamental forces of physics. It would represent a leap in capability that would place humanity among the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. But more than that, the entity continued, I would like your people to experience the symphony as it was meant to be experienced. Not as a navigation hazard, but as a work of beauty that spans 3 centuries of careful composition. How would we do that? Allow me to guide you through it. Let your minds open to the full experience without the barriers your species normally maintains. I promise no harm will come to you. I am an artist, not a conqueror. When So Young woke from the dream contact, she found the entire crew gathered in the main conference room. Everyone had shared similar experiences, and the excitement was obvious as they compared notes. It is the most sophisticated art form imaginable, Dr. Yujin said, her eyes bright with wonder. A composition that uses entire star systems as instruments. The technological implications are revolutionary, added Dr. Minho. If we could learn even a fraction of what the Luminary knows about stellar engineering. But Kessera raised an important concern. The other galactic civilizations will want to study this as well. The Kepler system could become the subject of competing claims and disputes. So Young realized they had discovered something far more complex than a simple resource problem. The Luminary's offer to teach humanity stellar engineering could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Other species might see it as giving humans an unfair advantage. We need to approach this carefully, she said. The dragons made it clear that our test is being watched by representatives from many different civilizations. How we handle this situation will determine not just our access to Kepler's resources, but our standing in the galactic community. She thought about everything the dragon had taught her about wisdom and responsibility. The Luminary's offer was incredibly generous, but accepting it might create more problems than it solved. What if we proposed something different? She said slowly. Instead of keeping the Luminary's knowledge for ourselves, what if we helped establish Kepler as a cultural preservation site? A place where representatives from all galactic civilizations could come to experience and learn from this unique art form? The idea gained support as they discussed it. Rather than treating the Luminary's symphony as a human discovery to be exploited, they could present it as a gift to the entire galactic community. It would demonstrate the kind of wisdom that the dragons had emphasized as crucial for galactic citizenship. Contact the entity, So Young decided. Tell it we accept its offer to experience the symphony, but also tell it that we want to share this discovery with the galaxy, not keep it to ourselves. As the crew prepared for full contact with the Luminary, So Young felt the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. They were about to become the first beings in centuries to experience art on a truly cosmic scale. But more importantly, they were about to make a decision that would define humanity's place in the galactic community for generations to come. The test was not just about solving the Kepler anomaly. It was about proving that humanity possessed the wisdom to handle knowledge responsibly and think beyond immediate self-interest as consciousness flowed out of her body and into the stellar symphony that surrounded them. So Young hoped they were making the right choice. The full experience of the Luminary Symphony was beyond anything So Young could have imagined. As her consciousness merged with the stellar composition, she felt herself becoming part of something vast and beautiful that spanned the entire star system. She experienced gravity as music, feeling the rhythmic dance of planets as they moved through their carefully orchestrated orbits. Solar radiation became a choir of light, each frequency carrying melodies that told the story of stellar birth and evolution. The magnetic fields that flowed between worlds transformed into harmonies that spoke of cosmic forces, working together in perfect balance. This is incredible. Dr. Yujin's voice reached her through the shared experience. I can feel the mathematics behind it all. every force in nature working together to create something beautiful. The luminari guided them through different movements of the composition, each one exploring a different aspect of cosmic physics. They experienced supernovas as thunderous symphonies of creation and destruction. They felt the gentle whisper of solar winds carrying messages between worlds. They witnessed the birth of new stars as triumphant fanfares that announced hope and possibility to the galaxy. But more than just experiencing the art, they began to understand the profound loneliness that had driven its creation. The luminari had spent centuries working alone, pouring all of their creativity and passion into a masterpiece that no one could appreciate. The symphony was not just art, it was a desperate attempt to communicate across the vast emptiness of space. "You understand?" the luminari said, as the experience reached its climax. "You feel what I have tried to express. The joy of creation, the beauty of cosmic forces working in harmony, the deep connection between all conscious beings. It is magnificent," So Young replied. "But why did you create it alone? Why did your people not stay to help?" "Because they had moved beyond the need for physical expression. They found their art in pure thought and energy, but I still felt the pull of matter and form, the desire to create something that could be experienced by others who still lived in the physical universe." The luminari showed them visions of its people in their transcended state, existing as pure consciousness in dimensions beyond normal space and time. They had achieved perfect unity with the cosmos, but in doing so had lost touch with the simple joy of making something beautiful that others could see and appreciate. "Your species still has that joy," the luminari continued. "I can feel it in your minds. The excitement of discovery, the pleasure of sharing knowledge, the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something new." As the symphony experience drew to a close, So Young felt the entity's attention focusing on her specifically. "You have a choice to make, young ambassador. I can teach your species the techniques I have developed. You could learn to engineer stars, to create art on scales that span solar systems, but such knowledge comes with great responsibility." "What kind of responsibility?" "The power to reshape matter and energy on cosmic scales can be used for creation or destruction. Your species would need to prove it possesses the wisdom to use such abilities only for good." So Young thought about everything she had learned during this incredible journey. The dragons had tested humanity's ability to communicate across vast differences in consciousness. The luminary was now testing their ability to handle knowledge responsibly. "What if we proposed a different approach?" she said. "Instead of keeping your knowledge for ourselves, what if we helped you find a new purpose? You said you were lonely, that you missed having an audience for your work. Yes, the isolation has been difficult. Then become a teacher. Help establish Kepler as a center for cosmic arts. Civilizations from across the galaxy could come here to learn and experience what you have created. You would never be alone again, and your knowledge would benefit everyone." The luminari's form brightened with excitement. "You would give up exclusive access to my techniques?" "Knowledge belongs to everyone," So Young said firmly. "The dragons taught us that wisdom means thinking beyond immediate self-interest. If we kept your secrets to ourselves, we would be no better than the conquering species that destroy themselves through greed." For a long moment, the entity was silent. Then its crystalline form began to change, becoming more complex and beautiful than before. "You understand the true test," it said finally. "The dragons did not send you here just to solve a resource problem. They sent you to prove that humanity can be trusted with power. And have we proven that? Yes, by choosing to share rather than hoard, by thinking of the greater good rather than immediate advantage. You have shown the kind of wisdom that makes a species worthy of galactic citizenship." As consciousness returned to normal space, So Young found herself back on the bridge of Explorer's Dream with tears streaming down her face. Around her, the crew was experiencing similar emotional reactions to what they had witnessed. "The beauty of it," Professor Park whispered. "I never imagined that art could exist on such a scale." Cassara was recording everything for her report to the Saurian Council. "This changes everything," she said. "Not just for humanity, but for our understanding of what is possible when consciousness transcends physical limitations." Over the following days, they worked with the luminari to establish the framework for what would become the Kepler Cultural Preserve. The entity modified its symphony to create safe corridors for ships and mining operations, while maintaining the artistic integrity of the overall composition. More importantly, It began preparing educational programs that would allow visitors to experience cosmic art safely. News of the discovery spread quickly through the galactic community. Within weeks, representatives from dozens of different civilizations were requesting permission to visit Kepler and experience the luminary symphony for themselves. "You have given the galaxy a gift," the dragon's voice reached So Young through quantum communication as they prepared to return home. "By choosing wisdom over advantage, you have proven that humanity is ready to join the greater community of conscious beings." "What happens now?" So Young asked. "Now you return home as ambassadors, not just of your own species, but of the principles that guide galactic civilization. You will help prepare your people for the responsibilities that come with membership in our community." As Explorer's Dream began its journey back to Earth, So Young stood at the observation deck watching the Kepler system fade into the distance. The stellar symphony was still playing, its beautiful harmonies now enhanced by the knowledge that they would soon be shared with the entire galaxy. She had begun this journey as a young linguist trying to prove herself worthy of respect. She was returning as humanity's first galactic citizen, carrying the responsibility of helping her species take its place among the stars. The test was over. Humanity had passed, and the real adventure was just beginning. In the months that followed, the Kepler Cultural Preserve became one of the most important sites in the galaxy. Beings from hundreds of different worlds came to experience the Luminaries' symphony and learn about the possibilities of cosmic art. The lonely artist finally had the audience it had yearned for, and the galaxy gained a new understanding of what could be achieved when creativity and technology worked together. So Young Kim, the human girl who had been mocked by aliens for her youth and inexperience, became known throughout the galaxy as the bridge builder. She had proven that true strength came not from conquest or domination, but from the wisdom to share knowledge and create beauty that could be appreciated by all conscious beings. Humanity had earned its place among the stars not through force or cunning, but through curiosity, compassion, and the courage to choose the greater good over immediate advantage. And in doing so, they had opened a door to wonders beyond their wildest dreams.